particular honor for me, one in which I get to introduce to you Senator Elizabeth Warren. And her newest book, This Fight is Our Fight, which is now a New York Times #1 bestseller. Elizabeth Warren, one of the nation's most influential progressives and a longtime champion of working families and the middle class, is a senior senator from Massachusetts. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, Senator Warren served as the chair of the Congressional Oversight Panel for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Her efforts to protect taxpayers, hold Wall Street accountable, and ensure tough oversight of the Bush and Obama administrations won praise from both sides of the aisle. Recognized as one of the nation's top experts on bankruptcy and the financial pressures facing working families, Senator Warren is widely credited for the original thinking, political courage, and relentless persistence that led to the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Today, as a U.S. Senator, Warren is a member of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs, Health, Education, Labor and Pensions, Armed Services, and the Special Committee on Aging. A former Harvard Law School professor, she's the author of 10 previous books, including A Fighting Chance, a national bestseller that received widespread critical acclaim. Her new book, This Fight is Our Fight, is her 11th book, which you all have in your hands right now. The mother of 2 and grandmother of 3, she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts with her husband, Bruce Mann. Please join me in welcoming Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Hello, Los Angeles. Wow, I'm glad to be here. And hello, Skylight Books. Thank you very much for having me. We've got to support our independent booksellers, so I'm delighted to be here. I thought that what I would do tonight is I'd read to you a little bit from the book, and then Kelsey's going to come back out, and I think many of you submitted questions. And so we'll go through as many of the questions and answers as possible, if that works for you. So I want to start the book, the part I want to read tonight. I want to start by asking you to picture someone. I want you to picture Kai. She's in her 20s. She's tall and dark-haired. She's lively. She's interested in everything around her. When I first met her, my first thought was she's the kind who could take on the world and succeed anywhere. And here's Kai's story from the book. Kai grew up in Colorado, and even as a kid, she had a plan for her future. Her dad was a firefighter, and they loved spending time together playing computer games. It was their time. She explained that she'd been playing video games, quote, since as long as I could walk. She knew she wanted to create those games. And she knew that if she got the right education, she could land a career in a field that she'd been training for since her daddy lifted her up for her first game. Neither of Kai's parents had gone to college, and she didn't get any college counseling from anyone in her high school. She was pretty much on her own to figure out what would be the right school. Now, she didn't want to study art theory in a big lecture hall. Instead, she wanted hands-on work and sophisticated training that would prepare her for a real job. When she saw a TV commercial for the Arts Institute, a nationwide system of art schools, she thought, this is it. The promotional materials were amazing. She explained, one of the deciding factors for me choosing to attend the Art Institute is its focus on being a career college that didn't deal with the typical four-year college experience driven by fraternities or social events. Now, after she graduated from high school, Kai blasted off full speed ahead. I wanted to be surrounded by professional artists and designers, all aiming for the common goal of making it into the industry with focus and determination, she told me. Her older sister lived outside Seattle, so Kai worked out a way to move in with her and save on expenses when she enrolled in the Art Institute of Seattle, or AIS. She was ready to take on the world. Kai's first 2 years in college were a lot tougher than my own. She got up at 5 o'clock every morning to catch a ferry into Seattle and then ride a bus to school. She saw 2 years of sunrises, but she never complained about the early hours or the long commute. She was a little uneasy about whether she was learning the cutting-edge material prominently featured in the promotional materials, but she loved being around computers and working with graphics. To support herself, she worked part-time at Barnes & Noble. Even so, she kept her priorities straight. She attended every single class and did every scrap of homework. Kai was proud of her 3.9 GPA and determined to keep it up. Sometimes on those long commutes, Kai thought about her finances. She knew she could do the classwork at AIS, but by the time she reached the 2-year mark, she had already run up $45,000 in student loans. It's a lot of money. Early in Kai's 3rd year, the whole thing came crashing down. The Art Institute of Seattle wasn't like the state schools back home. It was one of 50 college campuses around the country owned by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. That corporation, Educational Management Corporation, and its highly paid executives were looking to haul in big bucks for themselves and their investors by scooping up Kai's federal student loan money. Now, Kai hadn't known it when she started out as a freshman, but the art institutes were in trouble. Complaints about fraudulent promises, fake records, and programs that didn't deliver were starting to pile up. The Justice Department opened an investigation, and by Kai's 3rd year, her program began falling apart. Faculty and staff members were laid off. The program's reputation took a nosedive. People said the credential it conferred was useless. Kai heard that AIS was shutting down the program, and she panicked. She was worried that even if AIS survived, her diploma might not be worth anything. Besides, she didn't want to lose a year, so she went into high gear, determined to find another school in a hurry. Kai was doing work she really loved, and she was more committed than ever to getting her degree in video game art and design. After researching alternatives, she packed her belongings, kissed her sister goodbye, and headed across country to Sarasota, Florida, to attend Ringling College of Art and Design, a top-notch private school. She was happy about the move. More resources, more connections, more opportunities. Kai took on another $30,500 in debt to pay for just this 1 year. That was on top of what was now nearly $55,000 in debt from AIS. She loved the classwork, but she couldn't finance a 2nd year. She just couldn't do it. Kai hated to leave Florida, but she refused to give up. Instead, she moved back home and started attending classes at the University of Colorado. That school didn't have the same video design programs, but it was much less expensive. And she figured she'd spend a year at the University of Colorado, get her degree, and then land the job of her dreams. Okay, she might not get her dream job right at the beginning, but she felt certain that she was born to work in the gaming industry and that once she got in the door, she could kick open other doors for herself. And over time, she would pay down her student loans and start a real life. She needed yet another student loan to attend her new college. So she added another $13,000 to her debt load, which pushed the total to right at $100,000. And because she'd hit her maximum under the federal loan program, she now owed money to both the government and to Wells Fargo. Yeah. During her last semester at the University of Colorado, when she thought she was just a few weeks away from graduation, the registrar's office informed her that most of the credits from her first 2 years at AIS, wouldn't transfer. Students like Kai often find out too late that for-profit schools don't meet the standards set by accreditors of state colleges and universities. She learned that she would have to attend school full-time for 2 more years before she could earn her diploma. Kai says she hit the wall. After years of sacrifice and hard work, completing college suddenly just seemed out of reach. I couldn't afford it, she told me. The bank wouldn't give me any more. My parents still couldn't afford it. My dad was sick, and honestly, at that point, I was done. Kai didn't finish the semester at the University of Colorado, and she never got her degree. So where is she now? She is 27, living with another sister in Connecticut, waiting tables at an Italian restaurant. She puts every penny of her paycheck toward her loans, literally every penny. If it wasn't for my family, she says, I would be homeless and poverty-stricken. And even with this level of commitment, after 5.5 years of payments, her loan balance is still over $90,000. Now, this is the point in the story when all of her apparent confidence just drains away. She drops her head and says, I am the poster child for what not to do. Kai places all the blame on herself, but I don't see it that way. Kai was doing exactly what everyone told her to do, work hard and get a good education. She didn't goof off and party. She kept her grades up. She had good recommendations from her professors. She had a chosen career path that promised a good job. Yes, she would have been better off if she hadn't been taken in by a for-profit college and then set her heart on attending a high-priced private art school. But I don't put all that on the shoulders of a 17-year-old high school senior trying to figure out how to build a future. Kai now joins the millions of Americans who have incurred student loans, some of them monstrously big, and have no diploma to show for it. And even when those young people do have a diploma, that alone won't always do the trick. 1.5 million people over age 25 have college diplomas and no jobs. Kai's story speaks of everything that is broken with American higher education. After graduating from high school, Kai got snared in the trap laid by for-profit schools. These places are pulling in 1 out of every 10 people who go off to college, getting them signed up for huge federal loans and often leaving them with little to show for it. Even when Kai finally made her way to a terrific state school, she came smack up against the hard reality that the school still cost more than she could afford. That's the first passage I wanted to read to you from this book. And I wanted to read it to you because this book is ultimately a book about people. It's a story about Kai. It's a story about Gina, a college grad, married, 2 sons who are now grown, has worked at Walmart for 7 years. Her husband's a roofer. When I asked Gina, did she think she was middle class? Gina said she didn't think there's a middle class in America anymore. She said, if there was, I wouldn't have to go to the food bank at the end of the month. It's a story about Michael Smith, a man who had a dream, worked hard all his life, and when the 2008 crisis hit, first he lost his job, and then he lost his house. It's also a story about Michael Belville, a man I met whose first words to me were, hi, I'm Mike from Douglas, Massachusetts, and I have Alzheimer's, early onset. I'm 55 years old. And he talked about what it means to forget everyone you know, your children, your wife, your whole life. Now, these are people in the book who give voice to millions of people around this country who never thought they would have to turn to their government for help. But they also never thought that their government would turn against them. We now live in an America where government is working great. Our federal government is just great for those at the top. But it's not working so well for Kai and for Gina and for Michael and for Michael. And so what I want to do for just a minute, I want to tell a long arc story about, and I tell this story in the book, over several pages in the book, but it's basically a story of what happened in America. And the story's going to start out on a great high point. This is a great piece of information. It's going to start in 1935 and go all the way to 2016, because we don't quite have the data in yet for 2017. But 1935, we're coming out of the Great Depression. Here's the first fact, and that is GDP in America, gross domestic product, and all the wealth, all the things we're creating, just keeps going up. It just keeps going up. It has a few bumps along the way, but basically it's just a steady year over year over year climb. Yay, we are getting richer as a country. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this into two parts, 1935 to 1980, and then 1980 to 2017, or 2016. And I want to talk about what happens in those two parts. So 1935 to 1980. America's coming out of the Great Depression, and one of the points I make in this book is we had been a real boom and bust economy, basically since the late 1700s. About every 20 years in America, the economy would crash. And the people just thought that's simply how it is. You know, like it was just a fact that occurred. And of course, the big problem was every time it crashed, it didn't just take down the speculators, it took down small business owners, it took down employees, it took down farmers, it took down all kinds of people. So when the big one hit in the Great Depression in 1935, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said an amazing thing. He said, we can do better than this. We can do better. And there were two principal ideas that he pushed forward. And the first one was, now I'm going to say, we may want to cover the children's ears here. And I say a word that you're not allowed to say anymore in Washington. Regulate. Yeah, you bet. We put a cop on the beat on Wall Street. It was called the SEC. We regulated the big financial institutions. We had Glass-Steagall. You had to choose if you wanted to be a bank, whether you wanted to be a checking account, savings account bank, and then there was a big wall, or did you want to be on the other side of the wall, and did you want to be a high-risk taking speculator? But you had to pick one or the other. We enforced antitrust laws. We regulated. Why? Basically, so the playing field was level. And ordinary customers and ordinary investors just didn't get cheated. That was the basic idea behind it. The second thing we did was progressive taxation. Tax those at the top, those who made the most, and use that money to reinvest in opportunity. Opportunity for our kids, opportunity for ourselves. And by golly, that is exactly what we did. We invested big time, 1935 to 1980, in education, a GI Bill, in K through 12, federal aid to education, in public universities. We invested in infrastructure, in roads and bridges, in power out in rural communities, in all the things it would take to have businesses grow and flourish here in America. And we invested, this is the remarkable one, we invested in research, in scientific research, and engineering research, and medical research. We believed that if we could build a giant pipeline of ideas, that we would not only have an economy that flourished, but that our children and grandchildren would be able to lead lives that we had not yet dreamed of. We made those investments, and they worked. Now, here's the thing. They didn't work totally for everybody. I get this. We were not perfect. 1935 to 1980, we started measuring the black-white wealth gap, and it was persistent. But here's the deal. We were so committed to the basic idea of opportunity that as the civil rights movement grew in the 1960s and 1970s, The black-white wealth gap that had been there for as long as we had measured shrunk by 30% in just 15 years. We weren't in the right place, but we were on the right road. And how did it work for most of America, 1935 to 1980? Take a look at the 90% of America, everybody outside the top 10%. Upper middle class, working poor, and poor. And the answer is the 90% of America got 70% of all that new income growth generated in this country. Yeah. We built a middle class. We built opportunity, and it was widespread. You look at it decile by decile, everybody. The pie got bigger, and everybody got more to eat. Okay, that's how it worked 1935 to 1980. 1980, Ronald Reagan. Thank you, California. Jeez. Hello? Okay. Ronald Reagan, and what did the watchword become? Deregulate. That meant fire the cops, not the cops on Main Street, but the cops on Wall Street. Turn the giant banks loose to do whatever they want. What could possibly go wrong? Cut back on enforcement of the antitrust laws. Go on the attack after unions. And that part about taxation. Cut taxes for those at the top. And then what happens? Make fewer and fewer investments in education, in infrastructure, and in basic research. And here's the deal. It worked. It worked. So remember, GDP continues to go up. 1980 to 2016, how much did the 90% get of the growth in new income? The answer, zero. Zero. Since 1980 in America, nearly 100% of the growth in new income has gone to the top 10%. So the country kept getting richer, but the shift went from everybody participates to only those at the top participate. And the black-white wealth gap tripled. Yeah, in that period of time. Let me go back to talk just a little bit more about Kai. I want to see if I can get Kai back in here for a minute. Today, 2/3 of kids in state school must borrow money to make it to graduation. Kai works every day to tread water on her student loans. Her $90,000 adds just a tiny bump to the giant ball of outstanding student loan debt nationwide. She has joined an army of Americans who are struggling to pay back money they borrowed to get an education. You know, the way I see it, every happy-face story about this economy should include a footnote that tags this fact. 40 million people in America are trying to figure out how to pay off a combined $1.4 trillion in student loan debt, right? And that's really the core difference. There are many ways to illustrate this difference, but this is why I tell Kai's story. I graduated from a commuter college that cost $50 a semester, right? Think about that difference. I know it's like laughable, right? You want to say, not really. And the answer is, oh, really? And it was in Texas. You know, it wasn't like it was even in a place that is known for its commitment. No, but think about it. I'm in time period 1 when I go to college. And the point is, I could pay for college on a waitress's salary, part-time waitressing, more than paid for books and tuition for me. By the time Kai comes along, that's not available. It's just not out there. So what happened to Kai? Because I want to wrap her story up. 9 years after she set out for college, full of plans and sure she would make a mark on this world, Kai will move back into her old room at her parents' house. She has no idea where she will work, maybe at another restaurant if she can find a job at a place where the tips are decent. She's given up on completing her degree. Her only goal now is to keep up with her student loan payments, 1 month at a time. With a $90,000 debt load and a job at the bottom of the pay scale, she can't even calculate when she'll be out of debt. Marriage, a family, a home of her own, these dreams look very far off to Kai. Kai's story breaks my heart, and the unfairness of it makes me want to spit. How can this country shut out a talented and hardworking young woman like Kai? How can any country expect to build a future if there is no room for a person like Kai to get an education, start down the road toward a good career, and build a foundation in a good life? And here's the part that really gets to me. You look at time 1 and time 2, the difference in what happens to America's middle class. We build America's middle class and then tear the legs out from underneath it. None of this was inevitable. This is not like it was caused by gravity, and after a while, a great middle class just sinks. No, and it was not caused by the rise of technology. It was not caused by the fact that we compete internationally. All those things are true, but let's face it, we face lots of change in our economy through decades and centuries. The point is, the country keeps getting richer. Now, I'll tell you what happened between time 1 and time 2. What happened is that a handful of millionaires and billionaires and corporate CEOs decided that they would invest money, millions of dollars, ultimately billions of dollars, to get the United States government to work for them and to leave everyone else in the dirt. This book is a story about good and evil. It is a story about what went right and a story about what went wrong. It is a story about great and monumental fights, about billionaires and giant corporations and CEOs and all their buddies in Washington. And it is also a story about Kai and about Gina and about Michael. So let me pick up with a couple more paragraphs. Trump and his team seem to believe yeah, we're going to talk about it. You bet. We're going to do this. Trump and his team seem to believe that government is the enemy and that poor, beleaguered giant corporations should be turned loose to do whatever they want. Break the economy, poison the water, cut cozy private deals with Russia, refuse to pay people for the hours they work. Trump and his team have the power to destroy much of what is left of America's middle class. They have the power to extinguish the hope that our children, all our children, will have a chance to grow up and do better than their parents. There's a lot of tough stuff in this book. But the toughest part is what comes next. Donald Trump truly is poised to deliver the knockout blow to America's middle class. And this is what got me engaged in this book. You know, we got to stay focused here. This is not about what Donald Trump says. This is not about his crazy tweets at 3 a.m. This is not about how outrageous he can be. It is about what he actually does. And think about what he's done. Here we are together on He's only been there 100 days. Yeah, it really is. It is like dog years. You know, it's just... I keep saying, what? Really? No. Isn't that like, aren't we on the 4th year now, you know, on this? But the things that the changes in the law that just keep rolling through. I'll just mention some of them. Because they don't even make the headlines. There's so much going on. So Donald Trump has signed off on a law to make it easier for federal contractors to steal employees' wages. He's signed off on a law to make it easier for corporations that kill or maim their employees to keep it secret. He's signed off on a law to let investment advisors cheat retirees. And to me, Trump Care is the one that says it all, right? He embraced a health care plan that said, let's knock 24 million people out of health care coverage. Let's raise prices for middle-class families. And why? So that a handful of millionaires and billionaires can get tax breaks. Is there anybody in here who thought the way we're going to reform health care and make it better in America is more tax breaks for rich people? That was the core? But that's really the point, is that Trump and his Republican buddies in Congress are delivering one gut punch after another to working families across this country, and that is why I am fighting back. That is why I am fighting back. You bet. And that's why I'm in this. Yep. You bet. Be strong. Yep. So here's how I see it. Things might look grim, and they are pretty grim, but I wrote this book as an act of optimism. In the book, I talk a lot about how to fight back. I talk a lot about democracy. And I talk a lot about how we make our voices heard. And so I want to finish with a passage that is taken from the morning of the march. Anybody in here march, the Women's March? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Good, good. All right. So let me set the scene for you. So I went to the inauguration. I mean, look, here's how I felt about it. I wanted to see that with my eyes. I wanted it burned into my retinas. I wanted it so that if there was ever a moment when I thought, oh, I'm tired, I'll do that tomorrow, I would close my eyes and think, oh my God, I'm back in. I'm in the fight. I'm in the fight. I'm in. It worked. It worked. Never tired. I have not been tired since Trump has been sworn in. It's true. It's true. You bet. So the next morning, so I'm back in Boston. I marched in Boston on Boston Common. And what I mean, woohoo! Yes, good, good. So I'm back in Boston, and I really am. I'm agitating over this. I'm thinking, what are we going to do? We don't have the votes in the House. We don't have the votes in the Senate to stop much of anything. They can change the filibuster rules, which of course they ultimately did. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I'm thinking, we got to have an army. We got to have an army. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you raise an army in a democracy? We got to change. We can't just be a people who get engaged once every 4 years during a presidential, or maybe every 2 during a Senate race or a House race. We have to have an army that's ready to go into the fight, and ready to go into the fight now. And so here's where I want to pick up the passage. By now, we were 8 or 10 blocks from Boston Common, where the march would begin. And that's when I got my first glimpse of our army. The sidewalks were full of people hurrying toward the Common. Women in pink pussy hats. Yes. Men pushing strollers. Very handsome, yes. Kids laughing and running. And I saw a little girl riding on her father's shoulders while clutching a hand-lettered sign that read, "I fight like a girl." And I thought, me too, sweetie. I'm in. And as we rounded the corner, I looked out at the massive crowd. There was an ocean of signs, colorful, clever, creative. I put a whole bunch in the book, but I'm just going to pick 4 that I can't resist. One of my favorites. "This is my first protest, but not my last." That's what we got out of that. That's right. One that some guy had ripped open a cardboard box and taken a magic marker. And it said, "Not usually a sign guy." I thought, yeah, no kidding, Said, "Not usually a sign guy, but geez." Another one that I love, big hand-lettered sign said, "We are all immigrants." I love that sign. And then one of my favorites, "Donald, you ain't seen nasty yet." We weren't fully organized yet, but the power was there, the energy everywhere. On a cold, bright Saturday morning, something special was happening. Every step brought us closer together. Everyone on Boston Common, everyone in Washington, everyone in little towns and big cities all across America and around the world. We talked and held signs that pointed to many different paths, but all those paths pointed toward building opportunity, not just for some of our people, but for all of them. And our very act of marching delivered the loudest possible proclamation of our deep down, unshakable belief that we can make democracy work again by insisting that this government serve the people. We are an army filled with optimism and hope and fierce determination. Yes, we are. We are. As I marched in Boston with tens of thousands of others that day, I had no illusions. I knew it would be a hard fight. I knew there would be dark moments, but I knew that we had tens of millions of people with us, and this fight would be our fight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Poppy. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, no, you don't have to do that. Thank you. 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 Okay.
Okay.
We're going to do some questions, okay? All right.
Glad you guys like that.
Good. So I haven't seen these questions. These are going to be good, right? Okay.
All right, so we got Kate O'Dwyer from Sunland, California.
Go, Kate.
As the mother of an opinionated 3-year-old girl, can you give me any advice on how to empower and encourage her as she grows up in the age of uncertainty and the war on women?
Wow. So, first thing I want to say is good for you, Kate, that you think this is an important issue. I'm glad, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're in this fight. You know, the way I see this is that when the history of this time period is written, yeah, people are going to talk about Donald Trump. They're going to say things like, what were you thinking? Okay, but they're going to talk about Donald Trump, but they're going to talk about the Women's March the next day. That is when democracy shifted. That's when voices across America changed. And so my view on this one is you're involved, Kate, and that's how you do the right role modeling for your daughter. You get out there, you get engaged right from the beginning. You're part of every march and phone call and protest and email, part of every part of it. And that your little girl will pick that up, because what she'll come to understand for all of us is that ultimately the power is not at the top. The power is right here. It's with us, and it's in us, and we got to get out there and use it. So that's the best I can give. That's the best I can give. We do this for our girls and our boys.
This one comes anonymously, but it was too good not to include.
Hey, Anonymous.
Do you think that a massive public outcry can stop Trump's outrageous tax plan the way it did with health care?
Yes. Yes. You know, actually, can we just spend a minute on another minute on Trump's health care plan? Because I actually think this is really important. That you all remember that, just set the scene. It's easy to forget kind of what's happened. So much has happened. But go back just a little bit. In the last few years, the Republicans in the House have voted to repeal Obamacare 60 plus times. I mean, think about that. You know, one day I called one of my friends over in the House, who's from Massachusetts, and I said, "Hi." I said, "What you doing?" He said, "Oh, we're just over here repealing Obamacare. That's all we do." He said, "We just vote on that every few days. We have to go out and say, I want to vote to repeal Obamacare." And that was it. And as long as we had President Obama in the White House, we knew that we were safe on that. But they want to do this. Senate Republicans, you know, champing at the bit, went out and campaigned on it. Donald Trump said on day one, right? What will happen in a Trump administration? We will repeal Obamacare. How many times did he say that? You know, we should look at the videos. So, but here's the deal. Day one came and went and it didn't happen. And you have to ask yourself, why not? Given that they had been so public, that they had the votes, we did not have the votes to stop them. Why didn't it happen on day one? And I'll tell you why. It's because of you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It is. So remember how it threaded out, because this is actually important to watch. Obamacare's general popularity was somewhere around in the 30s, right? It was. It just was not a very popular bill. A lot of people didn't know very much about it, were confused about it. And right after Trump got elected, there were a few of us who got in there and said, you cannot simply repeal and run. You have to repeal and replace. And think how different the world would be if they had repealed, if they just flat out repealed and done it on the first day. We'd be standing there with our begging bowl saying we just throw a few crumbs of health care our way and had to accept whatever they gave us. But that's not what happened. What happened is we kept up a single mantra, repeal and replace, and even President Obama picked it up at one point. Said, nope, you got to repeal and replace. And the minute that happened, they had to show what kind of ugliness they had in mind. And when they showed it, a lot of people across this country, two things happened. Obamacare keeps getting more and more popular, and a lot of people across this country, not just Democrats, said, whoa, whoa, whoa. So now I get it that the official reason that the repeal legislation didn't go through the first time is it was not brutal enough for some Republicans, right? Right? It was not enough to knock 24 million people off health care. It was not enough to raise the cost for middle-class families and to give a giant tax break to a handful of millionaires and billionaires. Not bad enough. But here's the key. The rest of the Republicans would not follow them over that cliff. And the reason is because of all the people who showed up at town halls, who connected by email, who wrote letters, who made phone calls, who did it. Oh, I have to tell you, I have to tell you, because I was there. I can be an eyewitness on this. If you ever wonder, do those phone calls matter? They matter. My calls are like freaked out. What happened here? So for me, we've now seen it. We saw where the power is. We stopped the first version of Trump Care, and we didn't stop it because we got one more vote in the House or the Senate. We stopped it because enough people across this country got engaged and said, I'm in it. That's exactly right, all the way. And we do that on this horrible tax plan. I mean, this tax plan is unbelievable. 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 How many times, Steve Mnuchin, I know, says during his confirmation hearing, there will be no tax cut for those at the top. Okay, we called it the Mnuchin rule. Lasted 2 or 3 days, right, before they got their next plan out. And then he was on television last week and was asked, is it possible that this tax plan will raise taxes for middle-class families? And he said, well, can you assure us that it won't? I think we have to cut to commercial now, don't we? You know, it was. But the point is, here it is again. These guys are doing, and this is the part I want everybody to focus on. They're doing trickle-down economics. It's plain old trickle-down economics from 1980 forward, only now it's like you've shot it full of steroids, right? And the cake is the biggest cake that they want to take, and the tiniest crumbs they want to throw back to the middle class. So I think, here's what I think. We get engaged on this, and because of you and people like you around this country, I think that this tax plan, we can kill it all. Absolutely. Yes. Bring it on, right? We'll do this. Okay, what else we got?
This question comes from Gary Kuwahara. Do you believe it will ever be possible for students to borrow for student loans at the same rate banks can borrow from the Federal Reserve?
You know, that was my first bill, my very first bill. When I came to the United States Senate, this is an issue I care enormously about. I care because I am the daughter of someone who sold paint and fencing and carpeting and ended up as a maintenance man. And there was nothing for me to go to college. And I ended up graduating from a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. I know the power of an open door. I live the power of an open door. And I believe we have got to open doors for our young people again. That's what we must do in America. Yes. So I confess that the first thing I did when I got to the United States Senate, and everyone's saying, oh, your first bill, well, it should be some technical, boring, and you should do it in your 3rd or 9th or 400th year or something like that. I was like, I really am. I'm getting really good at going, Still just go off and do what I want. But it is. I want to make a point here that it is obscene what the United States government does today. The United States government is making tens of billions of dollars in profits of student loan. And I mean profits. I mean, after you account for bad debt losses and the cost of funds and the administrative fees on it, make money off the backs of people who are born into families who can't afford to just write a giant check to go to college. So this is going to be one, we use democracy on defense, right? To keep them from doing a horrible health care repeal, to keep them from doing something terrible with taxes. I'll tell you where we're going next. We're using democracy on offense. And it's not just student loans, it's the cost of college overall. We've got to get the cost of college down. All right. Yep.
This one comes from Lori from Los Angeles.
Lori from Los Angeles, okay.
What can we do to save Dodd-Frank and the CFPB?
Oh, Lori, my gal. Yes. Okay. So let me start with this. Credit in the world has 3 time periods. You can always tell teacher, right? I love teachers. I always wanted to be a teacher. Okay, this is my big chance. You're all locked in here and can't get out. And I'm keeping an eye on you in the back row. Back there. Okay, so time period 1, Code of Hammurabi. You thought I was kidding. To 1980. I'm serious. You like that? Usury laws. Usury laws. We've had usury laws in that whole time period. They show up in the Bible. They show up all across Europe. They're in the colonies. They're in every state. And then in the United States, I won't take you through every detail, shift in the law, Supreme Court decision goes through, and in effect, usury laws are repealed. Not officially, but effectively they are. All you have to do is move to South Dakota, move your headquarters to South Dakota, and export your interest rate. And that creates time period number 2. And time period number 2 is 1980 to 2010. And this becomes the Wild West of credit. And this is what's happened in America. It's another part of what's going on when I talk about taking the legs out from underneath America's middle class. At the same time that America is making fewer and fewer investments in education, driving up the cost of college for our kids, cutting back on infrastructure and the good jobs it produces both in the short term and in the long term. At the same time that all of that is going on, the banks are effectively unleashed. And they go, I'll just give you one example. They go, Citibank has a credit card. I've got their credit card agreement from 1980. It's about 1.25 pages long in 12-point type. By the 2000s, it's 32 pages long. And it's in what's called mice type, which means only little mice can read it. Little lawyer mice. And what they had figured out was how you just trick and trap and fool enough people that you can literally just make money hand over fist. And you do it by I'm just being blunt, they just cheat people, right? They tell them it's a 2% interest rate, and it turns out actually it's a 42% interest rate. But the San Fran's filled in with camera from and back there in paragraph 59, and and that's how it all works. So the credit card companies are and the credit card portions of the banks are making money, right? And the mortgage lenders look over and say, we'd like a piece of that action. And they take the most straightforward credit product in the world, a 30-year fixed mortgage, and then they start playing with it. And they load up the tricks and the traps, and that creates a huge bubble in housing. The fees go through the roof. It was like selling to people grenades with the pins already pulled out. You just roll them to families, and they will blow up in 24 months or 36 months. People were not qualified for these mortgages. They would have to either sell the house or refinance for a giant fee after 2 years, 3 years. And then the banks figured that wasn't enough. Let's just gather all that stuff up and put them in crates of grenades with the pins pulled out and sell them to municipalities, sell them to universities, sell them to pension funds. Pension funds were big ones for buying this because you promised great rates of return. Because, of course, the housing market would always continue to go up and people would have infinite amounts of money to be able to refinance. And as you all know, it crashed the economy. And that crash cost us an estimated $17 trillion. I'll be blunt. We will never know exactly how many people lost their homes during this crash. It is in the millions. But you can't know because some of them never went through the paperwork. They just mailed the keys back. They just tossed the keys in the mailbox and left. It broke the back of millions of middle-class families. And it all started with, let's find a way to scam them, cheat them, trick them. And so that's time period 2. Coming out of this and coming out of the crash, I had the idea for this little agency. And the idea behind the agency was not that we needed a bunch of new laws. In fact, most of that stuff could have been controlled by the current laws. But the current laws were scattered among 7 different agencies, and for no agency were consumers, customers, real people, the number one concern. Fed's off making monetary policy and cannot be worried about this. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is concerned about bank profitability, and bank profitability looks good when you cheat your customers, right? Ask Wells Fargo. And so I had the idea for this agency. You gather up all these laws, you build this little agency, and then you hold this agency accountable. You give them the tools, and then you hold them accountable. To do what? Just to level the playing field. They don't have the usury tool, because America will not go back at this point to reinstituting usury. They do not have the usury tool, but boy, they do have the ability to call them out on scams, to make them do better disclosures, to get rid of certain practices like the teaser rate mortgages. And here's the deal. The little consumer agency, up and running now for about 5 years, it has forced the biggest financial institutions in this country to return more than $5 billion directly to the families they cheated. That is government that works. So the question was, what are we going to do? Because here's the deal. You're not going to be surprised by this. The banks actually hate it. I can think right offhand they have 12 billion reasons to hate it. And all the other bad things they didn't do because they got caught last time. The banks, but keep in mind, this is back to the point about democracy, because this was actually a good lesson in democracy as well. We didn't get this agency because the banks lobbied for it. We didn't get this agency because we had some powerful interest group behind it. We got this agency because, frankly, we got a bunch of groups organized. My original notion was I would go person by person. Like my first conference call on this new agency idea I had back during the crisis, I had like 2 people on the conference call, which I think legally doesn't even qualify as a conference call. But we got more and more people, and we started getting groups. And I always stop to say this. God bless the AFL-CIO. They said, we're in. SEIU said, we are in. AARP said, we are in. Consumers Union said, we are in. Different groups joined. They got their members on the phone. The banks were spending more than $1 million a day lobbying against this little agency. And we got it through because we made our voices heard in Washington. Democracy can work. But the Republicans have not given up. Literally, yesterday morning, I was over in the House, in Congress, testifying because the Republicans want to take the legs out from underneath the consumer agency. So this is one of those things, you know, it may sound technical and arcane, but that's why I told the story. Now that you know it connects to the Code of Hammurabi, you're like so in, right? You just totally, oh, well, if I'd known that, you know, I'd have been there from the beginning. But this agency matters, and it makes a big difference in person by person by person, and also when we add it up for our whole economy. So do this, do 2 things, if you will, on how we're going to fight back, because this is the center of the bullseye on the reforms. There are other things that are going on, but this one's right at the center. Do 2 things. The first one is when you get a chance, click on. It's called Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, cfpb.gov, and click onto it and look at their complaint hotline. They have handled more than 1 million consumer complaints so far. If you've been cheated out of $10 by your bank, if you have been cheated on your student loan servicing, if you have been cheated by a debt collection company, if you think your credit card company owed you a refund and wouldn't give it to you, it can be a big number, it can be a little number. Go to CFPB and they have a complaint resolution. Sometimes you can't get them worked out, but they get a lot of them worked out. And here's the best part. If you're just feeling just kind of ornery some afternoon, click on this dang site and search it. It is entirely searchable. So you can punch in the name of your bank and see how they're doing, right? And what kind of problems other people have had and clicked in. Or punch in something student loans, if that's something you're particularly interested in. So engage with it. That's number one. Go to the website, get to know it a little bit. And then the second one is, this is about the standing army. They're gathering their forces. They're out, they're lobbying. The banks are trying to get the House to move it. It does not look like the next fight that's coming up. It looks like taxes are most likely to be the next fight that comes up. But you've got to be ready. And when you hear they're coming after Dodd-Frank, when you hear they're coming after the Consumer Agency, we've got to be ready to mobilize the same way we did on health care. It's for all of us. I need you on this. Thank you. It's a great question. Thank you. Thank you. That's a good one.
All right, we have time for a couple more.
Couple more.
Elise Sugarman, senior at Occidental College. Local college.
All right.
What advice do you have for a soon-to-be college graduate who wants to begin a career in public service and join the movement to resist Donald Trump and the Republican majority? How do you envision the Democrats fighting the GOP and taking back Congress and the White House?
Oh, I say, come on down, baby. We need you. Yes. So I had the best conversation with someone on the plane yesterday. I was flying out here, and the person was telling me, someone else was telling me as it came up, is telling me about a family member who'd gone to Washington and went to work for one of the agencies, planning to work for 1 year, and said, I have met the smartest, most interesting, most dedicated people in the world. And this is where I want to spend my life, is I want to keep doing work in public interest. You know, I really do want to make this pitch. I think that the most destructive words that Ronald Reagan ever uttered, and believe me, it is a big list to choose from. Do you remember his ha-ha joke, what are the 9 worst words in the English language? I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Think about that. No, those are not the worst words in the English language. How about I'm from the government and I don't care about you, right? Yeah. How about that? That's a lot worse, right? Or I'm from the government and I'm only here to work for the rich guys. Yeah, that's Donald Trump's America. The idea that we have now said for 35 years, government is wrong, it is stupid, it is dumb, people who work there are only there to get in your way. And look, I get it. There are times we get frustrated with the government. I'm sorry, unlike anything that ever happens in private industry, right? Because they never screwed anything up, right? Or got in your way or were bureaucratic about it. But I really do believe this. Government is our chance to work together. And people who want to come into public service, you don't have to work for government to be in public service. You can obviously be on the nonprofit side. But I'm just making my little pitch in here for government. I think that part of the way that we've seen the shift in those 2 time periods I was talking about is that from FDR to Reagan, right, up until that point, we kept thinking, we put our shoulder behind it. And government is how we expand opportunities. Government is how we create things that are good and that are lasting. Government is how we invest. When I talk about our investments in research, you know the part that gives me goosebumps is how much we invested in research that we had no idea where it would go. Talk to some of the scientists who say their first 6 paths that they followed turned out to be total dead ends. And you know what? The United States government was the patient investor who said, well, try another idea. We can put a little more of our money toward that to try it. Why? Because that's where the new part comes from. The idea that Donald Trump would say in his budget that America, the richest country on earth, has no room to put any money into the National Institute of Art, into the NEH and the National Endowment of Art, the National Endowment for the Humanities. No, he is wrong. He is fundamentally wrong. But here's my point. We got to make it, when we think government is wrong, when we think it doesn't get it wrong, when we think it screws it up, the answer is not to lean back and say, well, what do you expect? It's just government. The answer is to say, I'm going to help make it better. I'm going to get in there and offer what I can do to help make this better. And so every young person who says to me, I want to go into public service, I say go talk to folks in Washington, in Sacramento, in local government. At least give it a try. At least give it a try. I think it's powerfully important. Thank you. It's a good one. It's a good one.
All right, our last question from Peyton Migliano. When will Trump be held accountable for his violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution?
When? Not soon enough. You know, this is just nuts. How many people thought you would ever have to learn about the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, right? You know how they're like things you thought, okay, there are things someday I may have to be called on to know about. I'm a law professor, and I was like, which clause is that again? Which clause is that? Oh yeah, I got that part. The idea that we now have a man who sits in the White House who takes gifts from foreign governments, who does business with foreign governments. This whole idea, I mean, it just kind of was a news story for like 28 seconds that Donald Trump got a bunch of trademarks, copyrights approved by the Chinese government. That, by the way, it's very hard. It's very hard for businesses to be able to get this. I mean, just legitimate businesses who are trying to do it. The Chinese really hang on to this, and now, of course, Ivanka has got a whole set, just as she has dinner. Well, but here's how this infects. So look, let me say both parts of this. First part is, why this is really so genuinely awful. This is genuinely awful because for so long, we have never in the United States been a people who've had to worry about whether or not the president and the president's family, in each negotiation, in each decision, in each engagement, whether that person was furthering the interests of the United States or simply furthering his own personal financial interests. And the fact that that has happened now in America, it's like the whole ground has shifted under our feet. And so for me, man, I got to tell you on this one, we have to keep the heat up, and I want to be clear on this. It's around emoluments. It's generally around conflicts of interest, which is not always exactly the same things because we got lots of domestic stuff. And the third one is on Russia. And that means we've got to investigate and investigate and investigate. We got to start open and transparent investigations about what's going on. Well, okay, because you guys are encouraging me. I'm going to go ahead and say this. Because to me they are tied. This question about who someone is working for. You know, just keep in mind on Russia, there are three things that are publicly known. There is no dispute about the fact. I think about the fact that we now live in a world where we talk about alternative facts. You know, I never in my life thought I would have to describe facts like with a modifier, like that's the fact. You know, I just thought that was all you ever had to say. It turns out you have to say, like, that's the, I don't even know what modifiers we're going to use, the facty fact. Right? The bigly true fact. No, that's the other side. That's the other side that uses that. I don't know. But anyway, think about what we know for sure about Russia. We know three things for absolute certain, drop dead sure. One is that our intelligence community multiple agencies have said unequivocally that Russia hacked into American systems in order to influence the outcome of the 2016 election. This is fact, right? You just have to stay with these, right? The second thing we know, the FBI has an active and ongoing investigation. About the relationship between Russia, the Trump campaign, and the Trump administration. We know this for a fact because they've said so. And we know for a fact that a major security advisor to the President of the United States had to resign in disgrace because of his ties to the, and now it appears, that's right, more and more are saying have broken the law. Oh, keep adding, yes. But here's the deal, in my view. So long as the investigation stays behind closed doors, then we cannot get to the bottom of it. What we need is a special prosecutor, and we need an independent commission. Now. And I'm going to say one more thing, and I say it pretty aggressively. That is not a partisan position. Every American, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, every American should care if the Russians interfere with elections here in the United States. That is a patriotic position, and we're going to be strong on this. We're going to be strong on this. So that was my last question. Oh, out there. All right. I want to say this evening, first of all, how grateful I am that on a beautiful afternoon that you are so nerdy that you would come and talk ideas and facts and all that stuff. I just love it. I just love it. But the second thing I want to say is I really do feel this sense of urgency. And that this really is a moment where not just our country, but the entire world could just be knocked in a terrible direction. This is not the moment in history that we had asked for. It is certainly not the moment we had hoped for. But it is the moment where we are. And I truly believe that as a country, we are being tested, and that we are being tested about what kind of a people we are and what kind of a future we want to build. And so I think of this as truly a test of our character. And the way I think of it is that the character of a country is not the character of its president. It is the character of its people. It is an honor to fight alongside you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're wonderful. Thank you. You guys were fun. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.